Here's a few numbers that startled me when I first read them. Today, about 230 million people around the world live within just 1 meter above sea level, and a billion, more than a billion in fact, live within 10 meters of the sea level. Even a 20 centimeter rise in sea level by 2050 is going to cause catastrophic damage, which is very much a real possibility with growing and mounting evidence on this front. This is going to lead to more than $1 trillion of damage every year in the world's biggest coastal cities. Let that sink in. And not just the money, it's about the people and the livelihoods and the ecosystems in which this exists. In fact, in India, we have more than 7,500 kilometers of coastline, and some of the world's most densely populated coastal cities, Mumbai, Chennai, Kochi, all of them lie on the coast. So, what do rising seas mean for us? Who's at risk? And what can we do to protect our people and the ecosystems? To help us answer these questions, I'm joined today by Dr. Indu Murthy, Head of Climate, Environment and Sustainability at CSTEP, a leading think tank in India based out of Bangalore. Dr. Murthy has spent years studying climate risk and adaptation and leads major studies and research projects on not just sea levels, but how climate impacts all of us, rural, urban livelihoods, and ecosystems. So, Dr. Murthy, welcome to the Climate Conundrum podcast. We're very happy to have you here to break down sea levels and what it means for coastal cities in India.
Hi, I'm very happy to be pleased to be part of the Climate Conundrum podcast. While you did introduce yourself, I must say that I've been very excited, very interestedly following the Climate Conundrum podcast. And in fact, I've been suggesting it to some of the young researchers, who are kind of keen on knowing about how do you communicate things in a manner that, people not in this particular space could understand. One of my suggestions to some of my researchers has been, why don't you just go and listen to some of the podcasts that Climate Conundrum has put out. So you're able to kind of break it into bite-sized pieces, which any common person should be able to understand. So very pleased to be part of this podcast indeed.
Thank you so much. That is really encouraging. So, like you must have seen on the podcast, I like to start with the basics. And I think the basic question here is that India has almost 7,500 kilometers of coastline. And some of the world's most populated cities lie on India's coastline. Mumbai, there's Chennai, Kochi, Visakhapatnam. I wanted to understand, what does climate change and sea level rise have in common, and how does it affect each other?
Yeah. So, I think it is true that, we do have one of the longest coastlines in India. Along the tropical Indian Ocean, and which is what makes it particularly vulnerable to sea level rise. So before we get into why being in the tropics and how sea level rise actually affects countries like India, the process behind it, let's just take a moment to kind of understand the connection between how do we actually kind of correlate climate change and global sea levels itself, right? So one of the key things that we need to understand is that it's not a linear process at all. So there are a combination of factors that are at play here. So we all understand and hear about global warming, right? With increasing temperatures and with more and more of these heat waves that even within our country that we are experiencing and all across the world. Europe has been talking about extreme heat, which is very uncommon and unheard of. So at this time, one of the key things that's happening is we all kind of acknowledge terrestrial warming. Land surface warming is something that we are able to relate to. But however, the oceans are also warming in the process. And then there are glaciers that are melting because of increased heat, and because of which there is loss of massive ice sheets that are happening. Now, this could happen in places like Antarctica and Greenland. But the point to be noted is that as temperatures increase, oceans would expand, and then land-based ice melts, which means it's adding more water to the sea, right? So although Antarctica is very far from India, it's hard to kind of for us to comprehend, how would it be possible? Something is happening several thousand kilometers away. But what is actually happening is that the melting ice would actually significantly contribute to the rising sea level worldwide. Let's remember the oceans are interconnected.
Correct.
So this interconnected nature of the oceans is what makes the problem felt experienced all across the globe, irrespective of where exactly it is happening. And also, it actually, as a result of which, what's happening is that low-lying coastal cities, you mentioned Mumbai, you mentioned Vishakhapatnam, Chennai, they're becoming especially vulnerable because obviously they are on the sea coast. There is an increased risk of coastal flooding that's going to happen. And of course, it does impact infrastructure, it does impact livelihoods because there could be fisheries, there could be agriculture being practiced. And when sea levels rise, the simple thing to be remembered is that there is something called salt water intrusion. We all know seawater is saline. Now, when sea levels rise, they basically it's mixing of the seawater with the groundwater that we traditionally used for irrigation or for drinking purposes. Now, when it becomes saline, it becomes unfit for drinking. It also becomes unfit for irrigation. And the ripple effect of it is that decrease in yields, decrease in incomes, and of course, people dependent on these also become impacted. So, which is where, all of these are very nicely interconnected. While we don't really think of it in that particular manner, that's the fundamental reason. And the other aspect about the tropics that I did mention in the beginning is that being in the tropic, India is actually more affected by redistribution of the water from melting ice in the Antarctica and Greenland, which tends to rise the sea levels more in the equatorial regions. And then, of course, you have frequent cyclones, storm surges, high monsoon, tides that could happen, which will worsen the impact. So, in a nutshell, a combination of the factors is what is resulting in what we are perceiving as sea level rise and its impacts.
So fascinating and yet also a little scary because lives are at stake. And this is just the fact that Antarctica and Greenland might be losing their glaciers that impacts us here. But so is the Himalayas, big key point in this discussion because
Absolutely.
while the sea level rise is, yes, at one point through the seas itself, the thermal activity that you mentioned earlier, but does the rivers also have something to do with this ecosystem?
Mm-hmm.
And can that also play a role in either helping or challenging?
Well, rivers per se, I mean, it doesn't contribute. I mean, as it is called, it's sea level rise. But then one thing that that we are witnessing is this increased extreme rainfall that is happening, right? Heavy rainfall events, you get more than 120 millimeter of rainfall or 100 millimeter of rainfall within a day in places where the drainage systems are not equipped to, and then the inflow and outflow. Plus, let's also realize that our rivers are also getting clogged in some ways because of the waste that we are pumping into them. So, which essentially means that, while they do not have a direct role to play in sea level rise, they do lead to urban flooding. So, in some ways, it mimics the kind of flooding and inundation that happens with sea level rise, although it's not the same.
Correct. Yeah. Water is interconnected. In fact, as I'm going through the episodes for the podcast, I'm realizing everything is so
Yes.
fragile and interconnected that a little change in one ecosystem might have tremendous effects on another.
Yeah.
But then, from a common man's point of view, I'm
Mhm.
wondering for someone living in Mumbai or say Kochi today, it's not as evident. You do see some signs unless your livelihood is dependent on the sea.
Right.
If you're a fisherman or you're directly farming near the coastline, I'm not sure people see this as evident. Is it still invisible to most of us in your experience and the work that you're doing? What have you come across among people?
Right. I think, as you rightly pointed out, if people are residing in the coast, they are losing land because of inundation, right? So, land loss is something that's evident, and these people are able to recognize. As you rightly said, if their livelihoods are dependent on those, it becomes very evident. But does that mean nobody else is realizing the impact of it? Then the answer would be no, because some of the infrastructure, let's remember that, all the coastal cities that we are talking are basically, they're hubs of economic activities. And there's a lot that happens on the coast, right? So a bunch of infrastructure that are there are also experiencing damages because of sea level rise, inundation, salinity, and so on and so forth. So, which is why, there is a growing recognition of the problem. Although I might not say that, it's same across everybody, every single population stakeholder who is directly impacted versus the ones who are not. But more and more, the impacts of it is being perceived, felt, and recognized as an issue. Or I would say people who have investments in large infrastructure are, if they are not recognizing it or experiencing it today, they do fear that it would become a reality in the future, which is where all this discussion, and as you may know, some of us or kind of read about this in the papers about climate disaster resilient infrastructure.
Yeah.
And Government of India kind of leads this entire coalition on CDRI, as it's popularly called. So this entire work on, how is it going to impact coastal infrastructure, power infrastructure. So there is recognition at the highest level. There's also recognition within industrial bodies as well. Interestingly, I don't remember the industrial body, but when we put out this report, somebody did reach out to us saying,
Yeah.
oh, we have assets on the coast near Mumbai. So can you just explain to us what's going to happen, and how should we take this into our planning? And risk factoring is something, the discussion went around those aspects. So I would say it's partly yes and partly no to the question you asked about, do everybody recognizes it? Yes, people who have stake are recognizing it, but maybe not everyone.
Yeah. And I think that's where your report, like you said, comes very handy. Can you tell us a little more about what the report was? What did you try to find out from that?
Yeah, right. So in our work, what we actually try to do is for specific cities, while a lot of focus is on tier 1 cities, we also looked at tier 2 cities here. The reason being very simple. Tier 1 cities are very well developed already. So whatever changes that we are kind of suggesting, strategies that we suggest are sometimes not very easy to kind of implement, because there's so much of infrastructure already in place. So which means, tier 2 cities are at the place where they are developing, they are planning. So they are in a better space to kind of integrate this information and then take it forward, being, as they say, evidence-based planning or, climate-informed planning. So how do you climate-proof your assets? So that is something, the entire rationale behind why we actually looked at a combination of tier 1 and tier 2 cities was that reason. So what we actually tried to do is using climate modeling, the kind of models which are able to mimic the climate systems, which is downscaled. There are global models which are downscaled, and that is what we've used. And what we've tried to do is forecast or project into the future up till, say, 2100, which is a very long time period. But for something like sea level rise, it's a very, as you also pointed out right in the beginning, it's a slow onset event. It's not an erratic, it's not like a tipping point. It's not like something that happens suddenly, right? It's not a quick kind of a thing that happens. So which means it needs to be studied, it needs to be understood over longer time frames. And you can't just say that, I measured it today, I measure it next year, and the difference is so much. It doesn't happen that way. So which is why we looked at these long time frames, and we tried to understand, what is the change? How much, if in historical period, if the rise is X millimeter, what would it be in the future period? Then what we did next is to kind of overlay the land use mapping. So when I say land use, we are talking about, in every city, there are settlements, there are some open lands, right? And there are some parks and neighborhood areas. In peri-urban areas, you might even have agriculture being practiced, right? So we kind of overlay this information on the land use information and try to understand what is the amount of inundation that might happen. Because just saying flooding would happen could mean different things to different parts of a city, right? There are low-lying areas within a city, and there are areas which are slightly at a high elevation comparatively. So which means the kind of measures that we undertake for these different places will be very different. There's no one size fit all, even within large cities like a Bangalore or a Chennai or a Mumbai. Of course, Bangalore is not a coastal city, but that said, any city for that matter has varied, and populations that reside in these different areas have very different capabilities.
Correct.
Invariably, the low-lying areas are the ones which have most of the slums and people, economically weaker sections of the population that reside in. So which means the kind of strategies that we are suggesting will need to be keeping in mind the lived realities of these people. You can't just say something, don't go to work, just stop getting out into the city to do certain things in this time. So which means we will really need to be cognizant of those differences. Our preliminary work, I would say, is not something that lends itself directly to decision making. I think it's a step in the right direction, which is with more work that we are doing currently, we are proposing to do in the coming year, we would be able to kind of get it down to that level of decision making and planning processes.
So, to sum up, you basically looked at historical data across 15
Yes.
cities, tried to understand the land use mapping, basically,
Yeah.
land use,
Yeah.
land change, LULC as it's called, and then tried to juxtapose this on the sea level rise. So, projecting into the future as to how this will impact people.
Right.
So, did you do also a community based analysis of the different pockets where people live and what they are working
Yeah.
on and
Right.
how that will change in the future?
Right. So we did not actually kind of validate it with people. I mean, actually doing surveys or talking to people in those specific localities. So this is mainly using maps and GIS and climate models that we've done this work. The next phase of the work is exactly what you're suggesting. So we want to go back and validate, okay, is this really the case? If so, what needs to be done and how do people perceive, and also look for solutions within the populations, because
Correct.
they already are doing quite a bit of things. Is there a way for us to enable them to do it better, do it much more efficiently? That's the question. Just to kind of go back to the question that you asked previously on the climate scenarios, one thing that I missed talking about, but just want to kind of tell the audience that when we say future, it's not about just the time frames. We're also looking at potentially what is the kind of emissions that would result in an increasing sea level rise. So whenever we talk about climate change, we're talking about development that leads to more emissions. So these scenarios, as we call, are basically simulating what are the potential paths in which development could happen. It could be an emission intensive scenario, or it could be a very high emission scenario, which means we are using more and more of fossil fuels, or we're continuing to burn more of fossil fuels, which means more emissions, more warming, and then as a result, more of these climate signals of impact, which is your heat wave, sea level rise, and all other things that we talk about.
That's very interesting. And I urge everyone listening here, if you are interested in how these projections are mapped out, because that is something that I regularly get from people as to how do you know that your projections are to be
Yes.
taken seriously? Are they worst case scenarios to alarm people to change, or are they actual evidence that may or may not change in the future? So that's a question I'd also like to ask you so that
Yeah.
I can answer people better.
Right. So my take on this always has been one thing. So, if you're prepared for the worst case scenario, anything less, you're good to go, right? So, but if you're not up to the best that the science has offered, if you're not able to get there, then anything more than what we are prepared for would result in a loss. So the question is, do we want to make that investment today so that we are buffering those losses, or do we wait for things, science to become much more clearer? Then maybe it's too late down the lane, right? Because the systems are changing so fast and there's only very little that we've understood. Let's also acknowledge that we don't have a perfect understanding of the way the nature interacts and the nature operates. We do have a fair understanding, but it's lending itself to use for certain decision making. Ultimately, it's about how do we safeguard or conserve our ecosystems? How do we conserve our people who are dependent on these climate sensitive sectors or ecosystems so that we don't lose out on a lot of the services that we depend on these systems for? Some of them we understand, some of them we don't even know probably, but it may never be known if we lose out on these. So, which is why it makes sense for us to be prepared, even though the science is not very certain, but it is giving a clear indication of the direction of change. The magnitude of change is questionable. It could be plus or minus something, right? But it's not way off. It is going to be, it would probably rainfall increase. It's positive by and large for, places like India. So, which it just means that the average may not change. People do ask me this question, oh, the average rainfall is the same for the past 10 years. So why are we saying climate change will lead to increased rainfall? So my answer is, averages always mask the reality, right? So, and also, it's the distribution of rainfall that matters actually. You might have, in a region there's 600 of rainfall spread over June, July, August, September, or out of that 600, you get 200 within 4 weeks. That's a sure recipe for disaster. Untimely rainfall, heavy rainfall within a span of 2 days, and then there is an extended period of dry spell. Nothing happens, no rain whatsoever. So I think these are real concerns, real experiences, and I think we need to learn from them and do something about it.
And that is where I think science comes handy. So more
Yes.
research like that. Well, going back to the report that you've published, the research that you've put out in there shows that the sea level rise across the cities you mapped out is uniform. Some cities are at a higher risk than others, and you also found evidence that some have a more likely chance that they'll be 30 meters or more under
Yeah.
sea.
Yeah.
What does that mean, and how can people actually even plan then in that case?
Yeah. So the reason that the impacts are differential is because of the way the cities themselves are, right? It is to do with the elevations that they are in, the kind of developments that have already happened in many of these cities, right? So I think that is where the differences kind of emerge, and so it's not the same across all the cities. So I think that is what we need to be cognizant of when we are trying to understand any impact of climate change for that matter. Across cities, there are differences. Across states, there are differences. Within cities, different
Correct.
parts of the cities, there are differences. So I
Some
think
neighborhoods.
there are different levels of development, which is what ultimately leads to that. And secondly, if you translate the impact into impact on populations, the more densely populated a city is, we are going to be talking about those impacts to be much larger than those that are sparsely populated.
The
So I think
intensity, I guess.
yes, absolutely. And low-lying areas we know do experience waterlogging that translates to damage to homes and infrastructure. Contamination of drinking water is another problem that emerges. And then, of course, if you have informal settlements, we know they are really at risk. We know these are not future threats; they are actually really happening, right? We do read about these, and as sea level rise continues, the risk will just worsen, which makes urban planning, drainage upgrade, climate resilience efforts as urgent priorities, which is why we need to act.
Correct. And that also highlights a little bit about the nature that exists in these
Yes.
places. Because some places, I remember reading that where ecosystems are thriving, the ecosystem services that these provide would be actually helpful to the local communities, vis-a-vis places like Mumbai, where we've already destroyed a lot of the ecosystems that are beneficial
Right.
and act as safeguards. So I think I want to get this segue in and talk a little about nature solutions. And there are so many ecosystems like mangroves and
Yeah.
wetlands.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know from you as to how you view this in
Right.
terms of sea level rise.
No, absolutely. I think well put, because see, these natural systems, which we call, popularly, we keep hearing this term as blue green infrastructure or nature based solutions. And the broader umbrella term is ecosystem based adaptation, right? How do you kind of weave development along with nature that already exists? So I think they do play a very important role. I think we need to recognize that, whether it is a mangrove or a wetland, right? These are natural buffers. They are natural breaks in many ways. They're coastal barriers that are natural barriers which kind of hold the sea at bay in many ways. So while we do think of them as natural barriers, it's also important for us to recognize that they also play multiple roles in the way they are, because the minute you talk about natural systems, they're actually storing carbon in some ways. While they are protecting against storms and flooding, they're also storing carbon. They're supporting rich biodiversity, and then of course they also help sustain fisheries and livelihood. There are mangroves which are supporting livelihoods as well. People collect firewood, people collect a lot of other produce, and they depend on them for income as well, right? So which means these systems, while on the face they look like, okay, they are forest ecosystems, to call them as mangroves or wetlands, but they're playing multiple roles. Benefits of maintaining these is huge. But it's also true that, when there is sea level rise, these systems are also vulnerable
Right.
because they actually exist in a very narrow zone between the land and the sea. right? So, which is what makes them highly sensitive to even small changes in water levels. So, there are potential threats to these ecosystems as well, because a rising sea could drown them if they can't migrate inland or keep pace with sediment buildup. Now, urban development that happens very close to these ecosystems will not allow them to move inward. So, which is where it restricts these natural systems to survive in the face of such natural threats. So, which is where development, keeping in mind the ecosystem or the blue green infrastructure that already exists, becomes very, very important, because if we are losing them, we are losing critical protection for coastal communities to begin with. If we are, even if we want to think only in a people centric manner, we are losing protection for coastal communities. And then of course it increases climate vulnerability. It's like a wall, right? A natural wall. It just, the gates are open, so your floods, your cyclones, everything can hit you directly. So which is where I think when you're talking about resilience, it's both ecological resilience and also economic resilience that is built when you maintain these kind of natural buffers or natural ecosystems.
I, in fact, love to put the business case study that well, these ecosystems are vital because you're going to lose a lot of money
Yes,
if they're not there, and if we have to build those, we can't replicate the same that nature does.
absolutely.
In fact, no matter how many crores you put in, it's not going to be the same
Correct. Yeah,
resilience.
yeah.
Yeah. What are the implications? When I think the most obvious question everybody would have here is, which cities are the most vulnerable right now in India?
So I think, like I said, some of the Mumbai and Chennai are, coming out from our study, from what we see. These are two of the cities that emerge. And in fact, it's not just our study, even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a global body of knowledge put together by scientists. So there also they talk about, flooding and sea level rise and inundation that is likely to happen because of climate change in cities like Chennai, right? So I think these cities are more at risk, primarily because A, because of the geographical locations, B, because of the kind of developments that have already happened, and also C, because, like I said, these natural buffers that are there, even if they have to thrive, they probably don't have enough space to thrive because there's so much of infrastructure, gray infrastructure that's there, which hampers them from moving inward.
And in fact, we're building more of those.
We're building more of those as well. Exactly, exactly. So that's where the concern is. And if we look beyond, implications on this, there are social and economic implications of displacement due to sea level rise also. Because, like we talked about, lands being inundated, people being impacted. The worst case scenario is when people may be forced to leave their homes, often from poorer, low-lying coastal areas, and they will lose their livelihoods. And I think Bangladesh is a classic case. We hear about submergence of land. We hear about large scale migration that is happening. And it's more, I think, pertinent, particularly in, say, fishing, farming, and informal sectors, people
Yes.
in these sectors.
Yeah.
So, which means it translates to unemployment, food insecurity, and poverty ultimately. So, that's definitely a cause of concern. Secondly, social displacement also strains families and communities because it will disrupt education. Healthcare access becomes the biggest problem when you're looking at migration and this kind of impact, which means you're deepening inequalities. Inequalities already exist, right? And this kind of an impact would actually kind of deepen much more existing inequalities, especially for women and marginalized groups, right? Because we hear about stories during migration that, women and young children, particularly girls, I mean, it could be sexual harassment, no access to clean water, healthcare, right? Hygiene. These are the biggest issues that emerge. And of course, when people see, much of the migration is usually when something happens, people do migrate to urban areas for want of better livelihoods or for want of employment. What potentially happens is there is a conflict over a little resource, small resource that does exist out there. So, which is why I think people are talking more and more about planned relocation.
Yeah.
Planned relocation, unfortunately, is a possibility, but it's costly and complex too. Because the entire planning will have to be inclusive. We need long-term policies and significant public investment to actually make it happen. So, which is where, although we do recognize the problem, the solutions are known, actually rolling out is not so simple. There are multiple dimensions that need to be looked into.
In fact, I recently have been reading reports about now Australia accepting visas for climate
Yes,
impact,
refugees.
and some of the island nations are already
Yeah, Vanuatu or something, right? Yes,
exact.
yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, in this something I always want to, like, I have a fangirl moment every time I hear Mia Motley speak about
Mhm.
Barbados and represent
Right,
small island developing nations. I think it's such an important topic to tackle because not everyone has the say and the voice on a global
right,
platform to
right.
talk about
Absolutely.
marginalized communities.
Correct.
The threats are real, the problems are multifold. But what are some of the steps that we can actually take and, according to you, can be done with government, with
Hmm,
the city planning authorities that
hmm, hmm.
can help us currently?
I think, yes, but one thing I think we really need to understand is that there is no single solution. It's always a sleuth of solutions that need to be put in place, right? So, if you're looking at Indian cities, typically, it's a mix of engineered, ecological, policy based solutions that need to be put in place. So, to me, the immediate steps would be, strengthening the coastal infrastructure itself, right? So, when I say strengthening coastal infrastructure, we're talking about maybe drainage systems, sea walls as they call it, and then restoring these natural buffers that we discussed, mangroves, wetlands, etc. More importantly, I think where many of the cities are quite lagging behind is the land use plans. They really need to be updated to prevent development in high risk zones. We're sitting with dated plans, which means development is just happening based on what was there, say, a few years back or a decade back. Right. So that's the biggest issue. But that said, cities like Chennai are restoring marshlands. So let's also acknowledge the fact that cities are taking action. So in Chennai, there is restoration of marshlands that's happening. Mumbai is trying to integrate flood resilient infrastructure. While, cities like Kolkata, we know they're involved in wetland protection. The city of Kolkata has a huge wetland. So they're looking at wetland protection in a big way. Or Kochi is talking about climate resilient housing.
Correct. Yes.
So there are enough examples within India. And of course, if you look globally, the Dutch cities like Rotterdam or even Singapore offer a very useful model. I mean, Singapore is a land scarce city. There's not much greenery out there. But what they're trying to do is they're combining nature-based solutions or blue-green infrastructure with strong planning and public engagement. I think that is what we need to learn from these while we are tailoring response to, say, local geographies or specific climate risks and communities to build long-term urban resilience. So I think there are enough examples, but rolling them out at scale is something that requires very clear, localized evidence that needs to be generated on where we are today. And think tanks like CSTEP, where we kind of try to build that evidence to kind of support that planning process and rolling out solutions in the long run.
Correct. And as your name indicates, you work with science, technology, and policy.
Yes.
So I'm guessing you are already in the process of creating solutions, advising government policy on use of nature-based solutions as well as innovative technological models.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, right. Are there any success stories that stand out to you immediately? If there was one solution you had to pick to advise to the government or to people to take up at scale, what would that one be?
I mean, like I said, there's no one
No, I
single
mean, this is
thing
a,
solution. But
yeah,
at the same time, one of the key things that another piece of research that we did, which is quite simple, but we don't really think of, particularly in cities, is can we think about rooftop greening as a solution? I mean, it doesn't seem like, on the ground water flooding that we are talking about versus, what happens on the rooftop. But then, basically you're sinking in a lot of water right there. It doesn't
correct.
allow it to flow down, right? So that's one thing that comes to my mind. But I think more important is conserving what we already have as natural buffers.
Yes.
I think that's the easiest solution that any city can take up, right? You need to conserve that. Don't let unscrupulous development happen in these areas. If we could kind of guard them, and then in a very systematic manner, we could figure out how do we kind of integrate or weave into the fabric of a city which has a lot of gray infrastructure, these blue elements and green elements. Blue is all water bodies, green is all It could be parks, it could be tree cover, it could be grasses, or even open soil, so that it's able to kind of sink in the water that falls or the water that flows there.
So, if I'm someone living along a vulnerable coastline city, I think personally, if I had to do anything to prepare for the eventual rise in sea level, it could be to perhaps check the drainage systems around me, check the land
Absolutely.
use cover, and are there any platforms? I mean, I do know that there is a couple of platforms where they're showing sea level rise, fully mapped out with the data. But is there something like that in the works for India's policymakers?
Yeah. So I think the CDRI is trying to kind of create a lot of things, but then even we as a think tank, we are trying to engage with specific governments to create these visualizations which will enable policy, planning.
No, absolutely. And working in sync with the local communities and the government is our only hope at this point. So, food security, water security, urban planning. I think, as you rightly said earlier, that tier two cities actually have that hope where we are able to plan ahead and sort of tackle the growth that will be coming up in the next decade or so, already mapped out. Whereas it's a little more trickier in the cities that are already high density, like Mumbai and Chennai, to pivot. But thank you so much for this discussion, Dr. Murthy. I think you very simply put forth these complex concepts. And while there is so much more to talk about this topic itself, I think limiting the conversation to a bite sized piece right now, just focusing on these cities, I think can be a good start for anyone interested. So, to everyone listening, share this episode, start a conversation in your community, talk about sea level rise, how it's affecting coastal cities, how it's affecting all of us and our livelihoods. And keep tuning in to Climate Conundrum podcast as we explore how we can face the climate crisis one step at a time. I'm Sanika Divanji, and thanks for listening.